not this time, but the year before that. And there's some guy down there, Josh, who used to work for Veloci, and now he works for that hosting company, Orange something or whatever. He tweeted, he said, watching Jeff Walpole's presentation on such and such, crickets everywhere. And he tweeted that. And I came up to him after, and I was like, hey, was it that bad? He's like, no, it's just those damn crickets. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you didn't hear that? Outside, there was tons of crickets. And I was like, you know that on the internet, they think that means that my presentation sucked. And then he retweeted himself, and he said, no, they were actual crickets. It was a good presentation. So, that's awesome. Yeah, true story. So, I'm Jeff Walpole, and you now know about my crickets. This talk is going to be about social collaboration software, and I wanted to kind of start out with some of the confusion that exists in this market by giving you the confusing title, Intraportal Collabo Wiki Majigger. And that's a reference to the fact that, social collaboration as a whole, while it's an integral part of everybody's organization, is not necessarily a clean set of use cases, solutions, and products that fit cleanly into the things that we all want. And so one of the things I'm going to do here is kind of walk you through the landscape and show you what's out there in the hopes that you can sort of, through that process, envision how Drupal might be a better solution for the particular problem you're trying to solve. I am going to use Prezi, so get your Dramamine out. You might need it. So an example of sort of some of the confusion of the social collaboration software is that there's all of these different problems that we're trying to solve, and we're all focused on things like security and document management and all these different things. But in reality, what we really have is a very dynamic, confusing, and converging market. This is something that changes every day, every week, every month, and so you really have to pay a lot of attention if you're in the process of looking for some kind of internal intranet or collaboration tool. This is sort of the high-level view of a little town I'm going to take you through. Take you on a little journey here. So first I want to talk about understanding sort of what the actual problem you're trying to solve is. And again, that's a reference to sort of, you're trying to get people to communicate, you're trying to share documents, you're trying to have knowledge management, you're trying to enable search in your organization, variety of different things. Second piece is really understand what you're looking for. It's enormously difficult to go out and look at vendors and look at a marketplace if you don't have a real conscious sense of what the organization needs. The third section is about the players. I'll give you an example of some of the people that are out there in each of these spaces. Of course, there's tons and tons of tools, but I want to show you some of the ones you'll probably come across the most often. And then talk to you a little bit about your options. How could you go about implementing this? What are the other ways that you might put something together for your organization? So that's kind of the roadmap. First and foremost, I want to kind of throw a question out. I think the problem that I've seen more often than not with social collaboration software is that we tend to be asking a little too much of it. We expect it to do all these things for our organization. It's sort of like the magic bullet syndrome, right? It's like we think we put this thing in, and then all of a sudden all these organizational problems go away. And in reality, we're actually dealing with organizations that are increasingly difficult to serve with their needs. So we're getting more and more geographically dispersed. We're relying more and more on virtual teams and offices, and we're producing tons and tons of digital content. I think about within my own organization, how the organization has fanned out geographically and virtually, and all the new sort of content that's being created by the people as we grow the organization. It's just this huge swirling mess, and I think that makes the complexity of picking a tool that much harder. So, social software has promised to solve this problem. The social software is out there saying it will organize project management, kind of outfit any organization for true collaboration. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, those things typically don't work. These are projects that more often than not fail. The success rate on them is about 20%. according to Gartner, and that's a pretty abysmal success rate. So let me break it down a little bit, and I'm talking generally about social collaboration. Let me break it down a little bit and talk about what specific functions I'm referring to. So traditionally, you had your intranets, right? And an intranet sort of had a bunch of different purposes. First is collaboration. So myself and my coworkers are able to get together on some certain subject and share information. Second is culture. So, this made us all feel like we were part of the same team. So I go there and I see the lunch menu and when we're going to happy hour and things like that. So it's sort of a way to promote internal culture and share information like that. Of course, there's a huge content component. This is where the HR forms live. It's where the whatever documents or process documents you have from your organization are, and all the forms and things like that. Communication. It was a way for marketing, internal marketing, or management to broadcast out to everybody in the organization. Hey, here's what we're doing with this, or here's some piece of information that's going outwards. And of course, it was a place to see activity, so you could see what your coworkers were working on, what kind of things were happening in the organization, documents being created, shared, downloaded, that sort of thing. That's sort of your traditional 5 major categories of use cases around intranets. And then, we all got sort of Facebook savvy and social media savvy, and we got used to a couple other components. The social web added our ability to author this. So in the traditional environment, it was your IT department or a designated person that was making those changes. It was a very small, controlled group of content contributors and administrators. Now we all expect authorship at every level. We expect to be able to comment, to like, to reply. We expect to be able to add our own documents, to make changes to things that are out there. And that's a fairly new concept in the corporate intranet world. It used to be more of a one-way communication. Now it's more of a bi-directional communication. And the other thing is connections. So now, increasingly, we expect, like LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, in larger organizations in particular, that this becomes a social network in which myself and someone else who are trying to solve the same problem connect to each other and then go and solve that problem. And in the past, that sort of thing was not considered to be as social. The idea of sort of friending someone in your company wasn't really there, and that's sort of a new concept that's come about with the social web. Combined, we see all these solutions fitting into like a raft of different categories, and one of them is still an intranet. The intranet still exists. It's not a very sexy word. People don't like to use it, but it still exists. And most large organizations, I'd say, probably 100% of the Fortune 1000 have some sort of an intranet solution. Same as a website. Portals, again, a dated word a little bit, but it's the idea that you have these sort of places that I can go, little knowledge pockets and centers to do searching and poke other systems through to access them. Asset management is becoming increasingly part of this picture. So you're talking about full document repositories, document management, sharing images, video, all the sort of assets that an organization may need to maintain. Wikis, which of course are highly interactive, text-based knowledge repositories that people can sort of collaboratively edit. And then what is now emerging in this sort of separate category is social collaboration, which is a lot of these things all combined, like an internal Facebook with the sort of the liking and things like that. So when you put all these together, it's a very, very difficult and confusing sort of environment. And I think at the end of the day, what I've seen and what I've heard from other people is that what they're really trying to do is essentially virtualize that intellectual property, those ideas that are floating around in their employees' heads, and they're trying to get all that knowledge out somewhere that's searchable and shareable. That's what they have in common. At the end of the day, that's the value to IT. The reason that someone would pay money to build a solution like this is because they can get all that valuable knowledge that's in these people's heads and put it out there for access by everyone else. The bad news, as I said before, is that 80% of these sort of social business efforts fail. And that's a huge number. 80% is really, you're taking a big gamble if you're an IT department and you're banking on this. And by the way, IT is where these decisions are typically still being made. Unlike the web, where a lot of the websites, where a lot of the decision making is shifting from IT to business units, or more specifically marketing. In these types of solutions, you're still dealing largely under the CIO with the IT department, and that's because they're seen as internal. They're seen as cost efficiencies more than they are out there gaining revenue or new market share or something like that. They're internal organizations, and they're really there to replace more manual ways of communicating and sharing information. And so they typically fall in the IT department under the CIO. And when you've got risk-averse IT departments and an 80% failure rate, put two and two together, it can be a tough project to sell and a tough project to work, which I expect is why a lot of you are here. And those of you that don't work for Phase 2 or aren't looking to make faces at me in the front row. So what's really going on behind the scenes? If you really talk to people about why they would have the guts to take a project like that on, and you really start asking them the questions, the one you hear a lot, surprisingly number of times you hear it, is the goal is to escape email. I mean, people literally have a very big problem with email glut, and they feel that if they can get some of these communications out onto a collaboration site of some sort, that the threaded sort of abomination of reply all will go away, and they'll have a more concentrated set of conversations. And we do this ourselves, in any sort of web development agency that you work with these days. Anyone here who does Drupal development probably pushes their client projects onto Basecamp or Atrium or some other solution like that, because when you distribute all those communications out into email, some of the real valuable stuff is lost. It sits in inboxes, and those little one-off documents and status reports become very hard to find. Whereas if they're centralized in one place, you've got sort of a better catch. So there's some logic to this. The second is they have this a lot of people have this dream of serendipitous connections, and ideas. So that sort of this is like the idea that I'm going to go on to the intranet or the social collaboration tool for my organization, and then realize that there's this guy who's done 3 years worth of research on this problem I'm trying to solve ahead of me, and he's just posted it all there, and I'm going to my project is just going to break wide open, because without this tool I never would have known that the guy down the hall in the other department was already doing this, right? And this sort of serendipitous connections and things like that is a huge promise in big organizations in particular. And the bigger the organization it is, the more likely it is that somebody's hoping that some connection will be made that isn't going to be made in the cafeteria. The other thing would be, you'll hear a lot of times, particularly from CEOs, because they tend to be dense, that just kidding. You'll hear that creating culture is something like that. This astounds me. Like when people say, when you talk to somebody and you say, well, why did you implement Sharepoint, or why would you implement this thing? And they say, well, because I really want sort of to inspire the culture of the company and all that. And it's odd that people would think of this as creating culture and not supporting culture, but you'll hear that a lot. And then, obviously, there are people in, especially R&D organizations or in marketing departments, that hope that by putting all this information out there together, that there will be trends that emerge, that new info, new ideas, new product ideas, new ways to do things will emerge. And then the last one, which relates heavily back to my project management example earlier, is that there's a need for CYA. And CYA is something that's done a lot better in a public, transparent place than it is in individual emails. People are reluctant to forward an email back and say, yeah, you did say that on October 24th at 4 p.m. But if it's out there and you can say, see, my boss said that on October 24th right there, that tends to happen too. So these are not invalid things. I'm not meaning to suggest that these are all bad reasons for a social collaboration tool, but it's interesting that these are the real reasons when you really start to talk to people about it. These are the types of problems that they're actually trying to solve. As I related to before, some of the problems is that some of the problems with looking at this as an IT problem is that these are really business problems. These are cultural problems. They are change management problems. They're management problems. And in a lot of cases, it has a lot to do with how your company's processes actually work. So a couple of things that I would recommend from seeing this is, get those processes and things straight before you go out and look for a tool to fix it. It's not going to happen. So you can't build a wiki without the culture of sort of team contribution and knowledge management. You'll have an empty wiki page out there with no one editing it. Similarly, you can't, if you don't have document management policies and things like that, just putting a tool out there that's going to hold those, things isn't going to actually fix any problems that you're having. And don't go out and choose some sort of, social media for business tool, like an internal Facebook kind of thing. If you don't want your team posting pictures of cats, because that's what people do in the real world. Sorry, we have a cat culture in our company, much to my chagrin. So what it really comes down to is your teams can make good use of software, but your software cannot create productive people. So starting with the people and the processes and then figuring out the tool is the key to that. So the next piece then is really knowing what you're looking for. So I would say that, navigating this landscape is really all about narrowing in those things I just said. Understanding the real reasons that people would or wouldn't use this tool is way more important than going out and looking at what features a vendor has to offer. If you go that way, you're coming at it completely backwards. So, and also think about what your users value most. I mean, you're going to have certain organizations where some things are more important than others. Not all organizations are cut from the same mold. Like examples are when you really look at like functionality that matters to people. From an early adoption perspective, if you got a problem where you're in a leading role and you're sort of driving this upon your organization, the things that will lead to adoption early on the most are going to be, one, usability. Huge fail point for a lot of these projects is the interfaces for these things are too complicated. There's too much information. There's too much data. It's got to be easy to use. You have to dumb it down at least 4 times than what you expect. So imagine, sort of the least technical person and imagine what they would need that interface to look like to feel comfortable. Second thing is organization. Your organization's using organization 2 different meanings. Let's say your company's view of how information should be structured and an end user's view of it are totally different. If you take an organizational approach, you're going to have a siloed intranet in no time flat. You're going to be looking at everything by department. HR, marketing. Well, guess what? Put yourself in the user's perspective. You don't think of things like that. You think of what you need, and you don't think of it in terms of whose boss manages that information. You think of it in terms of where do I find it? What am I using it for? And so your organization, and perhaps you could call in this context, your information architecture, your menus, your tagging, your terminology, if you have folder structures, whatever, all of that stuff is a key to early adoption. If it confuses people early on, they're just going to bail on the product. They're not going to use it. And the third piece is search. Nikhil, the keynote speaker earlier, showed an example of Georgia.gov in the Google font. If you were here for that early session, and everybody laughed, but it's really really interesting how accustomed we've all become to the idea that there's this sort of super powerful Google search out there that's going to make all of these things organized for us. And so you really have to think about that mentality when you're approaching any kind of internal collaboration tool. If you're on the IT side of things, you really need to be thinking about the long-term success of it too. And the things that are going to make your investment most successful in the long term, granted, these are very different. The early adoption is about setting the hook. It's about getting those users to say, all right, this is a tool I can use. I'm going to come back. I'm going to bookmark this. I'm going to check in tomorrow. I'm going to have this tab always show up when I log in the morning or whatever. From the other perspective, it's once you've set that hook and you've got those users and they're starting to contribute information, now as an IT person, you're thinking for the long haul. You're thinking about flexibility. I'm going to have 10 other systems in the next 5 years that are going to be for these same employees. How integrated do those systems need to be into this intranet or social collaboration tool? You need to think about cost. Like anything else, you need to be aware of the fact that this has a life cycle cost. You have to have a return on investment, and you have to know over a 3, 5, in some cases with an intranet, you're talking like a much longer life cycle for a system than a website. Your average website's going to flip in 2 years, and you're going to do a redesign because it's public facing, and you're embarrassed by that. Your intranet isn't going to flip for 5 or 6 years because it's just your employees that are looking at it. And for some reason, you're not as embarrassed by that, right? So there's different drivers in these cases, and also your intranet's more complex. And so more than likely, you're going to have a longer total cost of ownership, and you're going to have to make your cost arguments a little bit differently. And then the last piece is integration. How many other systems does it actually have to work with? Like, you're going to have an identity management system, like LDAP or something like that, where you're dealing with a true systems integration between that and another product or another way to access the tool. So those are totally different considerations. And again, any organization is going to have different combinations of priorities for these things. Some organizations might have really strong user base and the early adoption components aren't as important and the long-term IT investment is, or vice versa. So one more big thing, mobile. So often overlooked, for a long time we got away with overlooking it on the web, and that changed relatively quickly, responsive technology, and I think the burst in iPhones and iPads and everything we came around much quicker in the last year or two. But on the intranet and social collaboration side of things, I think the viewpoint is still, well, it's inside the firewall, it's going to be all terminal based. We have our big flat screen monitors that people are going to look at stuff on. And we don't tend to think of our organizations as being as virtual as they actually are. And if I'm a salesperson on the road and I need to find documents and I know they're on my intranet, can I access that with my iPhone? Those types of thoughts. So mobile is an often overlooked aspect of all those components. So, again, I want to emphasize that, for the most part, this is really this is an organizational choice. It's not a features choice. So the other things that you need to think about are governance. So who's going to own and manage that software for the long term, and your policies and procedures that are sort of integral to this whole system are going to change over time. Your access rules, your document management policies, your retention policies, your organizational hierarchies, things like that are going to change over the 5 years that you have this system. Who's going to be in charge of making sure that evolves with the organization? Training, so just like any system, training is often overlooked, but in an internal system it's incredibly important because you have a captive user base, you can force them to come, you can tell them that they have to use it, but for some reason we do a really bad job of training people on those types of systems, and for whatever reason it just doesn't happen, and you need to think a lot about how you're going to ramp those users up. Maintenance, so like any system, there's going to be new bugs and patches and things that need to be applied along the way. Security, so you're going to have internal information, competitive information, maybe financial data, HR data, things like that. So what are your security policies? Who can access it? Who, what, when, where? Who can change it? And you have to have a very robust plan around how that's going to work prior to implementing it. I would say, it's ridiculous to be thinking about even looking at tools without understanding first and foremost what you're going to be enforcing from an information security perspective. And then last is usability. I'm not last, just last on my list, but usability, and I talked a little about that before. You need to make sure it's accessible. You need to make sure that any sort of language, if you're dealing with a global organization, any language translation needs are considered. Handicap issues are considered. You're talking about rolling this out potentially in some cases to hundreds of thousands of people in large government or large multinational corporations. So you have to be thinking about that on a global scale. by and large, you don't have any new problems. These are all sort of typical IT things. But in this case, you're going to find a lot of solutions. So you're going to see a lot of products out there in the marketplace, and you're going to get a little bit wowed. You're going to get a little dazzled as you get into it. So you have to come back to remembering that problem that you're trying to solve and really drive that decision based on your organization's unique needs and not what they're wheeling out in the demo. Demos are cheap, in a lot of ways. If you're getting sold on a demo, it means you really need to stop, back up, and figure out how you would use those specific things. This is a summary of what I've already said, but I think for the most part, you also need to be thinking about the long term. That's another key point. Is just for the most part, you can envision what you need right now in the next 6 months, but you can't pick a tool unless you know what you're going to do in a year or 2 years. So let's talk a bit about the players. Everybody's always curious. There are tools out there that do these things. So while I'm talking a lot about the organizational side and the processes and things like that, let's look at some common players. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. If you go out and you do searches on this, if you go to Wikipedia or if you go to Gartner and Forrester and these guys, you're going to find different players all the time. There's probably 150 to 200 major software packages that do a lot of this kind of stuff. So don't expect to find a single comprehensive list anywhere. But here's some common ones. I'll just walk you through. For intranets, you have Sharepoint, of course. OpenAtrium was designed originally as an intranet application. What's that other one, Mike? What's that thing? Forget. Whatever. It's some other one. Some other one with a bad logo that you don't recognize. So, in the portal space, the ones that sort of use the portal terminology and think of themselves as something that connects other systems, you'll see LifeRay a lot. Open source, Plone, open source, two good tools. Document management wise, you'll hear a lot, particularly in this community, about Alfresco. It's open source. It integrates nicely with Drupal. We play nice with each other. They talk about how great we are in web content management, and we talk about how we suck on workflow and why they're good at that. And so you'll see a lot of integration with Alfresco in this community. Of course, there's really big players here, right? So you've got people like Microsoft who are moving now into Microsoft Office 365, which is like your Google apps, equivalent. So you've got cloud-based apps and folders and management stuff like that. Box is another one. Of course, Dropbox is another example. So people that are in this sort of document management space. How am I sharing documents amongst my coworkers? Microblogging is a big thing. So you'll see tools like Yammer, which we've used in our company, or Google Apps, or Salesforce now is getting in this space. They have something called Chatter. And these are small little internal Twitter-like tools that are used for quick, rapid communication, statusing, updating of people's presence, whereabouts, what they're working on, that kind of stuff, or just sharing links and things like that inside an organization. Incredibly important for just quick knowledge sharing. For deeper knowledge management stuff, you've got wikis. Classics would be, on the open source side, MediaWiki, which runs Wikipedia, Twiki, or TWiki, which we used to use for years. Our organization since moved to Confluence, which is an Atlassian product. They also make Jira, if you're familiar with Jira, the ticket management tool. And so those are popular wiki products, and of course many more out there as well. I keep going backwards. Ones that have sort of traditionally focused a little bit more on sort of the project management use cases, though they're not full-blown project management tools, they're more social ways to collaborate, statusing, and things like that. Huddle, Thought Farmer. This is an area where OpenAtrium is used very extensively in the Drupal community and actually externally as well. It mirrors the functionality, the original OpenAtrium 1.0 in particular, mirrors the functionality of Basecamp very closely. So Basecamp from 37 Signals is probably the most popular collaboration tool between clients and sort of web development or design agencies out there. And so I'm sure there's no one in the room that hasn't heard of that. And on this true, what they call social collaboration side, you have a tool called Jive that's very popular and has been implemented a lot of places. Another open source project, MindTouch, and then Drupal Commons, which was created a couple years ago specifically to solve those same use cases as Jive. And so I think where you'll see that a lot is, again, in this sort of social, we want internal Facebook network kind of thing within organizations. It's become very popular, and of course it's Drupal and open source. So, the features that these all focus on are very overlapping, but you'll see things around search. You'll see timekeeping. That's a common thing. You'll see document management. You'll see project management. Obviously, discussions, threaded discussions, blogs, those types of things, very important. Often there's user interaction around liking or voting and polling, so they're used a lot for sort of trying to trend topics or trying to trend popularity of certain assets. Calendaring is pretty common, so particularly in a project management setting, you're talking about due dates or sprint schedules or something like that, or it could just be looking at coworkers' calendars, so that's a pretty common use case as well. I won't go through all the others, but I think you get the point that there's a wide variety of features, which makes this a very difficult space to pin down. When we plot it out on sort of a playing field, this is what I sort of think of this as like the maybe the Gartner quadrant thing or whatever. You've got a spectrum kind of going from goal to goal here, with the far left being, and I apologize if this is hard for you guys to read. I know it's a little small. Platform solutions all the way to the left, and what I mean by platform solutions is these are things that are designed to be customized. They're designed to be a starting point for something, but not a true out-of-the-box solution. God, I wish I could blow this up. I know it's really hard to see. I'll tell you what's in these for those that can't read. Going all the way down to this end of the spectrum, you've got sort of purpose-built solutions, and that's more out of the box. That's where I see things intended to be used more explicitly the way that they come out of the box. So they're not starting points for you to customize and put your own UI on and integrate your own stuff. They're a little bit more out of the box. Going the other way, going the widthwise across the field from the bottom, you've got the communications focus, which is, this is really designed as a way for us to communicate back and forth about topics inside the organization or the enterprise. Going up to an asset focus. And the asset focus is really where Alfresco and Office 365 and the document management kind of thing is. So this is really about sharing documents, and this is really about sharing text and ideas and communication. When you plot those two together, you can kind of lay out the playing field, the major players out there that we talked about. I would put, by the way, the gray ones indicate open source, and the orange ones indicate commercial. So you're going to see a mix of open source solutions and commercial solutions. I would put at the extreme, sort of on the extreme of communication focus and purpose-built would be Yammer. So I don't think you can really customize it. You get what you get. It's SaaS-based, very communication-focused. But on the opposite extreme up here, asset-focused and purpose-built, you get Box, which is kind of like Dropbox. It's a document sharing sort of thing. I put Atrium down here, way more on the platform solution side. Our team that works on Atrium expects you to make customizations, modifications, to treat that more as a glue product, a framework from which you can integrate other systems, than to say, open it up, here it is out of the box, use it as it is. That's Atrium 2.0, the new Atrium. The older Atrium was a little bit more of an out-of-the-box solution. Commons, I think, a little bit more communication-focused and perhaps even a little bit more purpose-built. They do expect a little bit more of an out-of-the-box type experience. And so those are sort of some differences you'll see there. So the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is SharePoint. SharePoint is a $2 billion market. They are currently investing very heavily in assets and communication features and they're not going anywhere. So they are the elephant in the room. They are the alpha, the omega. They are everything in this space. And my personal contention is that Drupal could do a better job. And I think that SharePoint, while it has enormous installed base, is probably at a very weak point from user frustration, from licensing costs, from people that are shifting from a Microsoft platform to a LAMP stack. For all of those reasons, I think it's sort of a ripe market for all of us who are either implementing, evaluating, or building Drupal solutions. We really need to be looking at that. So, to quote Homer Simpson, SharePoint is like alcohol. It is the cause of and the solution to all of life's problems. So, to summarize, the social collaboration landscape, increasingly diverse, more and more saturated, has formidable market forces like SharePoint, Google, Salesforce, and it can drive you crazy. But I definitely think that it's an opportunity for everyone. So let's talk about some options. I don't like to review anymore. First, know that there's a lot of different ways to do this. So, you should never feel like you're forced to pick one of these products that I laid out. Use it exactly as it is. There's all kinds of combinations. There's hybrids, there's customizations, there's rolling your own, there's taking one of these things and integrating it with other things. So everything's on the table in this space. There's not a lot of sort of lock-in, and you need to think about that. So there are a lot of different ways to do it. You do need to look out for common pitfalls. There is a form of lock-in called vendor lock-in, which is if you do get into a situation in which you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in licensing fees, you may feel locked in, and you may not feel like you can use best-of-breed solutions because your investment has gone to a single vendor. So I think being very, very cautious about that, either from a SaaS perspective, where you don't feel you can move your data because you're now locked into an environment, or from a licensing perspective, where you don't feel that you can use something new because you've got a sunk cost in licenses you feel you have to recoup. Second piece is, while it's great to customize, over-customization is a nightmare in this space. So you need to be careful about what kind of modifications you're making to these types of platforms. Be aware that there are tons of tools out there, and your IT department and your other departments and everybody's out there trying to use something to solve similar problems. So you have to be very savvy in this space to compete against other internal systems. Do not expect to walk in with the single, this is the collaboration, wiki, document management, intranet, whatever, to rule them all, and while the other departments pick something very similar, ours is going to prevail. You're going to deal with a lot of internal competition. It's just a fact of life in this space. And then, the fourth point is, remember, you have a very simple metric in this space. It's called user buy-in or user adoption. And every single time you win a user over to that system and you keep them there, that builds power for that solution that you have. And every time you lose someone, it takes power away. So user buy-in is incredibly important. So let's consider opening it up. I'm sure everyone's wondering why I focused on commercial stuff at a Drupal camp. So let's talk a little bit about ways to do this the open source way. If you look at what's happened in web content management in the last, say, 3 years or so alone, we have completely won from an open source perspective. We have made the case and we've won, and all of the traditional vendors, no matter what they cost or how great their solutions were or how many Fortune 500s or how many government agencies they had, they're all on the run, all of them, universally. Drupal's the second most popular content management system in the world, and WordPress is the number one. So that should tell you right there that the same things that occurred there could and should happen on the intranet side. There's no reason why the same forces wouldn't prevail. What are those? So the return on investment is better. Flexibility is essential. In fact, probably more important on the internal side than the external side. The way that a lot of these vendors want to do things is just not going to work for most organizations. So their way is not your way. In a lot of cases, just having frameworks and things you can modify and change, i.e. glue, flexibility, integration tools like Drupal, where you can change it, you can install modules, you can modify the theme, you can add your content, you can integrate it with things. Incredibly important when you're dealing with a bunch of different internal systems. And then the last thing is, just like it did on the web, innovation matters. So if you think that one software company is out there thinking of all the great ways that your internal organization can collaborate and coming up with the best features, then it's kind of silly when you think about the power of the open source community. So we've got 300,000-400,000 Drupal developers who are all working on modules that will work on your system. So I think that's an incredibly important reason to consider this. Really, open source solutions just give you a platform that you can extend and customize without fear of lock-in. So some distros and modules. This isn't my favorite list. It's a little weird. It's kind of a mixed bag for those of you that recognize some of these things. But there's a lot of tools out there I would advise you to explore in the Drupal community in particular. There's a key sort of framework module in organic groups that is the sort of the linchpin for a lot of these solutions. You've got tools like Workbench for workflow. There's a bunch of tools out there that do things like CRM, Red Hen CRM, Civi CRM. There's a new tool called Totem that's for social. Is that yours? Okay, so is it for social? Building community-based collaboration. So I'm repeating for the record. There's Urpal, which is more like an ERP thing. There's Drupal Wiki. There's OpenIdeal. This is like a really weird smorgasbord of like modules and distros, just to give you a flavor for all the ways that people have taken Drupal and tried to make it into a more interactive sort of collaboration tool. Two big ones I want to reference specifically: Drupal Commons. So Drupal Commons is social business tools focused on forums and communication. It's based on organic groups and Spark, which is a IDE, not IDE, but sorry, inline editor. Yeah, inline editor. Thank you. And basically, Drupal Commons comes out of the box looking a little something like this, maybe a dated version or whatever, but it comes out with sort of, what I consider to be better looking than Facebook, and very similar in terms of that sort of social functionality. These are just a couple examples. These are group pages, so individual city groups, and then you've got conversations and active groups being trended on the right. So that's an out-of-the-box type solution that you can also modify, customize based on Drupal. OpenAtrium, which my team maintains and builds. Mike Potter, sitting in the second row, is the architect for this. Version 1.0 was very, as I said, focused on the project management use case, very much around kind of like the sort of the Basecamp, exchange of files and things like that. Version 2.0, which is now in beta as of last week, is actually very robust in terms of its integration to other things. So we expect you to integrate this with other tools like Confluence or Jira from Atlassian or your timesheet tool and things like that. So it's a framework, a collaborative plugin framework. It's got a lot of focus on security, user hierarchies and grouping. It's got a lot of focus on document management, so we use the media module to allow you to embed video and documents and do some workflow around that. And also, it's got, in essence, a very flexible framework structure that is intended to be themed. So it uses the Radix theme, which is just based upon Bootstrap that Twitter created. So it's a very flexible sort of front-end UI, responsive, and works very well for theming off of it. So here's just an example of content visibility, documents. This is a very unthemed version. So, those are two tools that have gone pretty far down the path. There's a lot of others that you could use. My contention here is that everybody's at the Drupal conference because they've got use cases in their organization they expect to solve with Drupal. I really think that these solutions provide a better starting point than some of the commercial alternatives for the reasons I laid out. I also think, to be honest, that you're really not going to end up with the right solution unless you're dealing with all that stuff I talked about up front, which is you absolutely cannot approach a social collaboration or an intranet type use case by looking at tools first. You have to go the other way around, and that's why I talk from that direction here. You absolutely have to be looking at your organization's true needs and getting to the honest answers about those. Why are you actually trying to implement something and what matters to you before you start getting wowed with the features and the bells and the whistles, because those really aren't going to fly in your users unless you understand what their core issues are. They're harder to wow than you think they are. So, yeah, the final word would be that these things are also changing very quickly, and so this market is transforming very quickly, and I think that's absolutely where open source has been most effective in the past. It's why we won on the web content management side of things, and I think it's also why we'll be successful on the internal intranet side as well. That's it. Yes, I'm using Prezi. That's the question everyone always wants to know. I've given a lot of talks with Prezi where I finish and then it's like a whole bunch of people show up to ask questions and I'm like, oh wow, they really like to talk. And then they're like, the first guy's like, hey, what was that thing you were using for the presentation? Like, oh, that's Prezi. The next guy comes up. So, Prezi, how do you like it? And then the third guy comes up and he's like, no, what was that thing? Prezi. It was Prezi, okay?
Did you have Alfresco as open source?
Yeah. Alfresco is sort of a dual model.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at it, and when I started reading comments, the people at the low level, I don't remember the details, but they were really complaining, and then the high level becomes expensive and so on. And I'm not sure it's fair and accurate to list it as open source.
Yeah, so open source in this context, or in the true context, is a reference to its licensing model, not its cost structure, meaning that the software is, I actually don't know, I think Alfresco is GPL, or it might be BSD. I'm not sure what the actual license is, but the license is open source. The trick with some of the freemium models like that is that the functionality is restricted, and their hosted models provide other things that the free download models don't. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that there are open source code bases with commercial licensing models. Licensing in this context meaning to use, not, well, it's all the same really. So yeah, maybe there's another category like a hashed line or something that's a little mix.
Let's elaborate on what you're saying about Drupal as a goal to be better than SharePoint. I think the big elephant in the Drupal room is file management.
Fun and happy.
Yeah.
It's just not there. I mean, media has great aspirations, great promise, but it never quite came together.
Yeah, just sure.
Well, my question was, I've been trying to stay with Drupal, what's going on with that, and I was kind of disappointed with the progress of file integration and file management, so that, if there's any initiatives in either down for code freeze, or you're kind of still in that same basket of trying to work with better architecture.
So I'll repeat the question for the recording in the audience, and so the question was the sort of, maybe I'll paraphrase and say the Achilles heel of Drupal in this case is document management, right, or file management and file attachments and things like that, and how you handle like file management. Sorry, this is.
Don't ask any questions.
It's so loud outside, it's distracting. Files being treated as a first-class citizen in Drupal, right? So, yeah, I think I'm obviously not an expert on Drupal 8 per se, but I do think, like you said, there were a lot of discussions about making improvements to that. I don't know how much of them did or didn't make it in for code freeze, as you asked. Mike, do you know?
Yeah, nothing really needed. I mean, media module certainly did, and it's really not any better. And
that's why, I mean, Jeff made the point, that's why while I think Drupal can make a lot of ground in this area, you shouldn't be looking at it as an end-all be-all, and that's where that integration comes back.
Yeah.
You're probably going to need to integrate with the document management solution if you really have strong needs there.
And the big kind of hopeful cloud over that, or hopeful ray of sunshine, is the PHP Code group, which is the framework interoperability group for all the major PHP platforms. Like Larry Garfield is representing for Drupal and is trying to establish a common common
framework for that.
between
Well, and I think Mike's right in that. I mean, for the most part, I think when we looked at redoing Open Atrium, one of the things was most requested was like a file management component. But we really started talking about it, and we were like, look, a year ago that might have made sense, but now people are using Google Docs, they're using Dropbox. I mean, how good a hierarchical file management tool are we going to put in here, open source, and then we're going to maintain it for 2 years or 3 years, and all people are going to do in 2 years is complain, why do you even have this? We use, whatever. Is there an integration for Google Docs? Is there? And so that's the mentality that we have is we absolutely need to be preparing for the fact that other people are going to use, especially in an intranet or an internal situation, people are going to be using other tools, and the better an API we can write to make the stuff work with those, the better we're serving those customers, rather than saying, here's a module that does everything that those other tools you have does just as well. It's not likely.
Yeah, that's a problem with Google anything is their propensity to change the model and change the API, change
Sure.
change what you can do.
Yep. No, that's a huge problem.
That's where we that's where you would hope that something like Alfresco might maybe go more free than Neon.
Exactly.
And kind of set up
Yeah, like a free version of Alfresco would work.
Yeah.
So, next
I was
question.
just curious to hear more about the decision and the experience going to Confluence and how that's working out. People buying in and figuring out how well it's working.
Yeah, so interesting. So the question was about our wiki, and I mentioned we used Twiki before, and you were asking about Confluence and what the process there was. We've had a wiki since we started the company in 2001. And we brought over a wiki we had from a prior company. We've had a wiki since like 1999 or 2000. So we had an awful lot of old data. We moved it originally from MediaWiki to Twiki, and then we moved it from Twiki to Confluence. And in the process, we got rid of a lot of stuff. We shed it. But I think the process was pretty easy. As I remember, the Confluence, that was many years. I don't think anybody here was there. That was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. We did an import. There are some import tools. So I think we did an import, and then we did a lot of cleanup. If I remember correctly, the formatting was a little messy, but generally speaking, it was pretty easy. Confluence has improved a lot over the years. We just started using the latest version. It's got some pretty slick stuff. We actually intend to integrate that with Atrium. That would be our goal right now, and that's only because we have so much legacy stuff in Confluence. We literally have over 10 years worth of stuff.
So you're not using Jira for anything?
Yeah, no, we're using Jira and Greenhopper. Yeah, absolutely. And again, same thing. So on the case tracking or on the case management side of it, like in Atrium, there was this sort of case manager. This is the same thing I was saying about document management. The old case tracker was not simple enough for a basic to-do list, but it was not complex enough for anyone to do true ticketing or issue management. So it sort of lived in this weird area where nobody was really happy. And so we're going to use Jira, and we're going to write a plugin for Jira, and that's how we're going to do it. And someone else is going to write, a plugin for Remember the Milk or something. I don't know.
In terms of like people are just buying in, it's tough. So it's nice out.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Woo! Thanks, Jeff.
This must have been an awesome talk.
Oh yeah, it's great.
I'm sorry I missed it.
Best one I've seen all day.
Close all your applications, including your chat client.
I just didn't want to leave.
So
Dave
you know about the recording?
No.
That one right there is for recording, and I don't know.
So should I press pause on here for you?
I think so.